Muhammad was born about 550 years after the time of Christ in the town of Mecca during a time when the religious folk of the area rallied around a group of stones set up in the shrine at the center of town. These several hundred stones represented the various gods and goddesses of the surrounding tribes. The New Encyclopedia of Islam by Cyril Glass, a Muslim, writes that one of the most important idols in Mecca prior to Muhammad was one representing the moon god Hubal. It is said Muhammad made a doorstop of Hubal. Other historians claim the chief deity was known as Allah. Other idols represented his daughters. One thing for sure, the word Allah was commonly used prior to Muhammad's arrival. His father's name was Abd Allah, literally servant of Allah. This shrine has come to be known as the Kaaba, or cube in Arabic. Being on the trade route for caravans between India and the countries surrounding the Mediterranean, it was a popular place for religious pilgrimage, and as with most religious centers, it produces some degree of income for the local economy. It provided for a certain amount of cultural diversity as well. Now, Muhammad was a camel driver from a ruling Quraysh clan, and he was influenced by a number of different religious views of his day, and much of this is reflected in the writings of his book, the Quran, that he claimed was revealed to him in a trance by God through the angel Gabriel, who commanded, quote, "Read, in the name of thy Lord who createth man from a clot." Tradition has it that a Christian monk called Bahira in southern Syria claimed to have first noticed some sign of prophetic calling in Muhammad's life during his early days of caravan trade. During this time, he was working for a wealthy widow, Khadijah, who later became his wife. It was Khadijah that tried the spirit that gave Muhammad the revelation and gave him the stamp of approval regarding its divine origin. Others, however, suggested he had eaten the forbidden fruit. In Medina, or what was then called Yathrib, some 280 miles to the north of Mecca, he was exposed to local Jewish merchants and likely picked up some knowledge of their religious customs as well. The Al-Quran, or the reading, was given to a man who they say could not read, and many claimed at first to be a bit mad. Much like the Mormon religion that sprang out of the revelations of the American prophet Joseph Smith in 1830, Muhammad's revelation was not well received by the traditional religions of his day. His first converts were his wife Khadijah and a few close friends. It appears some of his ideas sprang from a monotheistic religion of his day called Hanif, which was neither Jewish nor Christian. His idea of doing away with the idol worship of many deities was revised to a monotheistic faith similar to Judaism, yet his ideas of both Jewish and Christian scriptures are clearly seen from unschooled biases. Now, like Joseph Smith, he claimed to restore his version of the, quote, true religion. Muhammad's version, being Islam, or those who submit, came about amidst a sea of debates that were present during his time. And one lingered from a controversy between church authorities in Rome and Nestorius of Antioch nearly 200 years earlier. Now, the issue that was being grappled with was how to define the nature of the incarnate Christ. Nestorius proposed that there were two separate persons, one divine and one human. Using unguarded language, he was declared, some suggest unwarranted, a heretic, and was banished to Upper Egypt, where he eventually died. The Nestorian movement, however, was carried far and wide into Syria and Arabia. Another question that was prevalent was what to call Mary, Jesus' mother. If Jesus was God incarnate, was it logical to call Mary the mother of God? The concern, of course, was that Mary might be elevated to deity herself. As history proved, this was a legitimate concern. The Roman tradition placed Mary as the Queen of Heaven, and some began to look to her in prayer rather than to Christ, the Redeemer. Well, when it became obvious that many people did not buy Muhammad's new revelation, conflict was soon to follow. The Quran spells out the reaction of those who Muhammad claimed to worship jinn, or devils, very clearly. Quote, "When our clear revelations are recited to them, they say, 'This is but a man who would turn you away from the gods your fathers worshipped.' And they say, 'This is nothing but an invented falsehood.' While those who denied the truth which it was first made known to them declare, 'This is but plain sorcery.'" Unquote. Well, the Quraysh clan that controlled Mecca and Muhammad's followers did not get along well, so the followers of Muhammad made a retreat to Medina in 622. Now, Muhammad had a knack for persuasive leadership, and therefore he was able to muster up a small militia to discipline the infidels. And his followers soon found that raiding rich caravans was profitable not only for material riches, but also for demoralizing his enemies. The Quran records these early days boldly, without shame. Quote, "They ask you, O Muhammad, about the spoils of war. Say, the spoils are for Allah and the Messenger. The believers are only those who, when Allah is mentioned, feel a fear in their hearts." And, of course, Allah gets all the credit. Quote, "You killed them not, but Allah killed them. It is not for a prophet that he should have prisoners of war until he has made a great slaughter in the land. So enjoy what you have gotten of booty in war." Well, what a convenient way to shirk one's responsibility for the murder and plunder of other men's goods. Of course, Allah did it. In 626, Muhammad led 3,000 troops against the Banu Qurazi Jews, demanding their submission to Islam or death. They chose death, and 600 men were buried in the marketplace in Medina. The Quran claims that Allah caused the Muslims to, quote, "inherit the lands, their houses, and their riches." Women were sold into slavery. In 628, he plundered the Khyber Jews north of Medina and took Safiya, a 17-year-old Jew, for one of his wives. Islam was forced upon all the Jews of Khyber until the expulsion of all Jews from Arabia under the Caliph of Omar. Such events helped to revive age-old tensions between Arabs and the Jews, and the Quran portrays Jews as, quote, "the greediest of mankind for life," unquote, and monkeys or apes in some versions. Despised and rejected. These verses have often been cited to inflame hatred among Muslim youth against Jews. Before long, Muhammad had gathered quite a number of followers who were intoxicated on their newfound power and religion. Muhammad had signed the Treaty of Hudaybiyah in 628 with the Quraysh clan back in Mecca, while all along building his alliance with their enemies. The treaty was to prevent any wars between the feuding tribes. In the year 620, however, Muhammad led an overwhelming army of 10,000 men against Mecca, where they took over the sanctuary of Allah, tore down all the images of foreign gods that had been introduced during the, quote, "age of ignorance," leaving only the black stone. And the Prophet sanctioned the tradition of kissing it, which is still practiced to this day. Though biblical characters at times set up altars or monuments for a memorial to historical events, nothing compares to the Muslim adoration of the Kaaba. Muslim tradition has it that it was first built by Adam. Later it was rebuilt by Abraham and his son Ishmael, who supposedly started the pilgrimage tradition. Well, 2 years after Muhammad had taken control of Mecca while planning a major expedition against the Byzantines in Syria, he fell ill and died. Well, it may strike some as odd that Muhammad, who claimed such close ties with Abraham, would be buried in Medina rather than Hebron, where Abraham and Sarah are buried in the land of Israel. By this time, his army had reached far and wide, and tradition has it that he had sent letters to many foreign leaders asking them to adopt his religion. Now, leaving no heir to his kingdom, his death sent his followers into a tailspin. And considering the power struggles that followed, one might be amazed that the religion even survived. Though the Quran warns that there should be no division among Muslims, Islam became divided into two major groups: the Sunnah, considered the orthodox traditional version, and the Shia, who elected a caliph or a successor from those related to the prophet through marriage. A series of squabbles followed for the next 10 years or so between the followers of Muhammad's wife Aisha and several caliphates, one being her father Abu Bakr. who only lived for a couple years after Muhammad's death. In 661, a rebellion arose, during which Ali, the husband of Muhammad's daughter Fatima, was killed. Now, the loyal followers of Ali, known as the Shiite Ali or the Party of Ali, have continued to fight for what they consider to be divine rights in the rule of the Islamic world. And over the next few decades, the capital of Islam moved for a short time to Jerusalem, then Damascus, and eventually to Baghdad, where it remained for over 5 centuries. In the year 635, 3 years after Muhammad's death, Damascus fell to Muslim invaders. By 638, Antioch and Jerusalem had been taken over by the Caliph Umar. The turn-the-other-cheek thing was not working well for these mostly Christian towns. By 642, Alexandria, Egypt was overrun by Muslim troops, and in a short time, most of Egypt was flying the banner of Islam. Before Umar was murdered in 644, Persia was under the Muslim control as well. In many cases, churches were converted to mosques. A large mosque was built on the foundation of what used to be a Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Those who would not convert to Islam were often killed or given dhimmi status, paying special tax for protection and to support Islamic expansion. Then in 712, Spain was invaded. Well, in 732, Charles Martel defeated the Muslim army 1,000 miles north of Gibraltar, thus stopping the northern expansion. Now, though many renegade Christians and Jews were able to live under Muslim rule in Spain, in 850, a zealous priest named Perfectus had had enough of this ecumenical spirit, and he spoke out against Muhammad's religion and lost his head. Many of his followers spoke up as well and were put to the sword. Muslim media and historians often spin a revised picture of this period as though it was a Muslim paradise of peace and tolerance, when in fact it led up to some of the most intolerant times in Spain's history. In Melanie Phillips' book, The World Turned Upside Down, she writes, the great medieval Jewish philosopher Moses Maimonides was forced to flee his native Cordova in Spain after it was conquered in 1148 by Muslims, who gave the Jews a choice of conversion, death, or exile. Often, conversions were nothing more than lip service for the sake of business and saving one's neck. Numerous Muslim campaigns into India brought the wealth of India into their coffers by the year 1030. The divided caste society of India was no match for the fanatical unity of Islam. Muslims looked at the Hindu idolaters with serious disdain, and the Mughals built many large monuments and mosques to demonstrate their power and authority. And later, in the 17th century, the Sikhs found themselves stuck in the middle of a crossfire between Muslim and Hindu conflicts. So in reality, there's nothing new under the sun when it comes to Islam and violence. So 9/11 was a wake-up call to the naive West. While we are playing football and playing video games, mosques are being built by our Saudi friends from whom we buy our oil. This is a bit like inviting in the devil to keep the heating bill down. Now, the hypocrisy of Islam is seen in its abrogation and deception. While churches and synagogues are forbidden in Saudi Arabia, in Rome, like a Trojan horse, is built one of Europe's largest mosques. Theo Van Gogh was shot and stabbed to death for criticizing Islam in a video. Then, Geert Wilders, the Dutch politician, is threatened for the same reason. Then, the Seattle Jewish Center is shot up by a Muslim. Well, this is the spirit of Islam. Then Muslims around the world have the nerve to protest when a pastor in Florida threatens to burn a Quran. Then all along, the Unity Productions Foundation, a tax-exempt business, is producing glorified Muslim films which are shown on PBS and are distributed around the U.S. to libraries, mosques, and civic leaders in order to neutralize criticism of Islam. Then, in cahoots with Unity Productions, behind this media blitz is Peaceful Communications, a non-profit corporation established in the year 2005 in Washington State. And on the board of directors is a guy that has been a member of the CARE organization in Dallas. Well, I'd like to quote something from Apostle Paul in his epistle to the Ephesians, where he says, "Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them. For it is disgraceful even to speak of the things which are done by them in secret, but all things become visible when they are exposed by the light. For everything that becomes visible is light."